The message arrived on every screen, every radio, every device that could receive a signal. It came in every language spoken on Earth, translated perfectly by technology that made human computers look like children's toys. The voice was cold and mechanical, but the words were clear enough that even a child could understand them. People of Earth, you have been chosen for integration into the Kralthian Empire. You have 72 hours to surrender all military forces, disband all governments, and prepare for occupation. Resistance will result in the destruction of your planet. This is your only warning. The broadcast repeated every hour. Between repetitions, the massive alien ships hung in orbit like dark clouds blocking out the stars. There were 50 of them, each one large enough to cast shadows on entire cities. The ships did nothing but wait, silent and menacing, while humanity scrambled to respond. In the White House, President Richard Hayes sat at the head of a long table surrounded by military generals, scientists, and advisors. Everyone looked tired and afraid. The discussion had been going for hours and nobody had any good answers. Earth's military was designed to fight other humans, not aliens with technology centuries ahead of their own. "We have nuclear weapons," General Paul Dixon said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "We could launch everything we have. And accomplish what?" asked Dr. Helen Price, the president's chief science advisor. "Those ships have shields. Our satellites detected energy barriers around each vessel that would stop anything we could throw at them. Nuclear weapons, conventional missiles, nothing would get through." "So what do we do?" asked Secretary of State Karen Wells. "Just surrender? Let them take over our entire planet without even trying to fight?" President Hayes stood up slowly. Everyone fell silent and looked at him. He walked to the window and stared out at the night sky, where the alien ships were visible as dark shapes blocking the stars. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. 43 years ago, something crashed in the Arizona desert," he said. "It wasn't one of ours and it wasn't Russian. The government at the time made a decision to keep it secret and to start preparing for the day when we might meet whoever sent it." He turned back to face the room. Several people were leaning forward now, confused and curious. "Since then, every administration has put money into something called the Sentinel Project. Trillions of dollars over 4 decades, hidden in black budgets and classified programs. Most of you don't know about it because you didn't have clearance. I only learned about it 6 months ago when I took office." "Mr. President, what exactly is the Sentinel Project?" General Dixon asked. Hayes picked up a phone on the table and pressed a single button. "Bring him in," he said. The door opened and a man in a military uniform walked in. He was tall and lean, maybe 50 years old, with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The stars on his shoulders showed he was an admiral, but nobody in the room recognized him. "This is Admiral Carl Peterson," Hayes said. "He's going to explain what happens next." Peterson walked to the head of the table and activated a holographic display that materialized in the center of the room. The image showed a massive ship, sleek and deadly-looking, bristling with weapons. It was clearly human in design, but unlike anything anyone had seen before. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the EAS Retribution, my flagship," Peterson said. "She's 2 kilometers long, powered by a quantum fusion reactor, and armed with plasma weapons that can cut through conventional armor like it's not even there. She's also completely invisible to standard sensors." The room erupted in shocked voices. Peterson waited for them to quiet down before continuing. "The Retribution isn't alone. We have 80 ships total, all built in secret facilities deep underground. We use technology from that crashed ship in Arizona, combined with our own research into theoretical physics. For 40 years, the best minds on Earth have been preparing for this exact situation." "Why didn't you tell us?" someone asked angrily. "Because if everyone knew, our enemies would have known," Peterson replied calmly. "And because building an entire space fleet in secret required controlling who had access to the information. Now that the aliens are here, the secret doesn't matter anymore." President Hayes stepped forward again. "The Kralthians gave us 72 hours. That deadline is in 6 hours. Admiral Peterson, is your fleet ready?" "Yes, sir. All ships are fully crewed and in position. We've been waiting in hidden launch facilities around the world. The crews have been training for years. They're ready." "Then give the order," Hayes said. "Show these aliens that humans don't surrender." 6 hours later, the Kralthian Admiral Vexthor sat on the bridge of his command ship, waiting for the humans to send their surrender transmission. He was bored and annoyed. This primitive species had taken the full 72 hours to make an obvious decision. Humans were even more foolish than he had expected. "Admiral, we're detecting multiple launches from the planet's surface," one of his officers reported. Vexthor sighed. "So they're sending up their primitive spacecraft for one last gesture of defiance. Ignore them unless they get too close. We'll let them see how hopeless this is. Sir, there are 80 launches. All of them are large vessels." That got Vexthor's attention. He pulled up the sensor display and frowned. 80 ships of significant size launching simultaneously? That suggested more coordination than he expected from these primitives. Still, it changed nothing. Their weapons couldn't penetrate Kralthian shields. Track them and prepare to fire a warning shot across their formation. Something to remind them that resistance is pointless. "Sir, the vessels have disappeared from our sensors." Vexthor stood up quickly. "What do you mean disappeared? Ships don't just disappear." "I don't know, sir. They launched and then all 80 vanished completely. No heat signatures, no electromagnetic emissions, nothing." Alarms suddenly blared across the bridge. The officer at the weapons station shouted in panic, "Sir, unknown vessel directly off our port side at 300 meters. They're firing!" The command ship shuddered as explosions tore through the hull. Vexthor watched in horror as 6 beams of superheated plasma punched through his shields like they weren't there at all. The beams cut deep into the ship, causing massive explosions throughout multiple decks. "Return fire! All ships, defensive positions." But across the orbital battlefield, the same thing was happening to every Kralthian ship. Human vessels appeared from nowhere, fired devastating volleys and vanished again before anyone could respond. The aliens' mighty shields, which had protected them through 1,000 conquests, offered no defense against weapons that operated on principles they didn't understand. The Battle of Earth's orbit lasted 17 minutes. When it was over, 2/3 of the Kralthian fleet was destroyed or crippled. The survivors fled into deep space, carrying news that would shake an empire to its foundations. Humans had not surrendered. They had sent warships instead. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the EAS Valiant and watched the tactical display with satisfaction. Around his ship, 79 other human warships were taking up defensive positions around Earth. The brief battle had been a complete success. The alien fleet that had threatened his world was now scattered debris floating in orbit, and the survivors were running away as fast as their engines could carry them. "Damage report," Morrison said to his executive officer. Commander Lisa Bennett checked her console and smiled. "Minor hits to the forward armor plating. Nothing serious. Engineering says we'll be back to full capacity in 2 hours." Morrison nodded. The Valiant had performed exactly as designed. He thought about all the years of training, all the simulations, all the time spent preparing for a day that many people thought would never come. Now that it had finally arrived, the preparation had paid off. "Sir, incoming communication from the Admiral," the communications officer reported. Admiral Peterson's face appeared on the main view screen. He looked tired but pleased. "All ships, excellent work. Return to base facilities for repairs and resupply. We'll have a full briefing in 6 hours. Peterson out." The human fleet began to disperse, ships heading back toward the hidden launch facilities they had emerged from. Morrison watched them go and felt a strange mixture of pride and worry. They had won the battle, but he knew enough about military history to understand that one victory didn't mean the war was over. "Commander, take the bridge," he said to Bennett. "I'm going to check on the crew." Morrison walked through the corridors of his ship, stopping to talk with crew members he passed. Everyone was excited and relieved. In the mess hall, groups of young officers were celebrating, replaying the battle on their personal displays and pointing out particularly good shots they had made. Lieutenant Danny Cooper, the weapons officer, waved Morrison over to his table. "Captain, did you see that destroyer we took out? 6 direct hits in 4 seconds. The targeting computer worked perfectly." "Good shooting, Lieutenant," Morrison said, "but don't get overconfident. That was just the first test." Cooper's smile faded a little. "You think they'll come back, sir?" "I know they will. The intelligence briefing said the Kralthian Empire controls thousands of planets. They have millions of ships. We just embarrassed them in front of the whole galaxy. They'll be back, and next time they'll be ready for us." The celebration in the mess hall became quieter as others overheard the conversation. Morrison hadn't meant to dampen their spirits, but they needed to understand the reality of their situation. Earth had won a battle, but the war might have just begun. 6 hours later, Morrison sat in the briefing room deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Around him were the other ship captains and senior officers of the Sentinel fleet. Admiral Peterson stood at the Front of the room with a holographic star map displayed behind him. The Kralthian Empire spans roughly 12,000 star systems in this region of space, Peterson began. Intelligence estimates they have between 15 and 20,000 warships. We destroyed or damaged about 34 ships today. That's not even a rounding error in their total strength. One of the other captains raised her hand. Sir, if they're that powerful, why did they only send 50 ships to conquer Earth? Because that's all they thought they needed, Peterson replied. To them, we were just another primitive species that would surrender after seeing their ships. They've been doing this for 3,000 years, and it always works the same way. Show up, make threats, accept surrender, move on to the next planet. But we didn't surrender, Morrison said. No, we didn't. And that changes everything. The Kralthians now know we have advanced technology and we're willing to fight. They're going to reassess us as a genuine threat, and when they come back, they'll bring enough force to overwhelm us. The room fell silent. Everyone was doing the math in their heads. 80 human ships against thousands or tens of thousands of alien vessels. The numbers didn't look good. A woman in civilian clothes stood up. Morrison recognized her as Dr. Helen Price, the president's science advisor. Admiral, how long do we have before they return? Unknown. It depends on how they react. If they're cautious, they might send scouts first to gather more intelligence. That could give us weeks or even months. If they're angry and want revenge, they might send a much larger fleet immediately. We could see them back here in days. Then we need to build more ships, Price said. The Sentinel project built 80 ships in secret over 40 years. Now that the secret is out, we can build openly and much faster. Peterson shook his head. Even with all our shipyards working at full capacity, it takes 8 months to build one of these vessels. The quantum reactors alone require materials that are extremely rare. We simply don't have the resources to build hundreds of ships in a short time. So what do? Another captain asked. We prepare for the next attack and hope our technological advantages are enough to offset their numerical superiority. Our stealth systems give us a significant tactical edge. Our weapons are more advanced than theirs, and most importantly, we're fighting to defend our home. That counts for something. Morrison raised his hand. Admiral, what about allies? If the Kralthians have been conquering species for 3,000 years, there must be other races that resent them. Could we find allies? Peterson considered this. That's a possibility worth exploring. The intelligence we gathered from that crashed ship included some information about other species in this region. Some of them might be willing to work with us against a common enemy. I'll recommend to the President that we send out diplomatic missions. The briefing continued for another hour, covering logistics, tactics, and contingency plans. When it finally ended, Morrison walked out with Commander Bennett. Do you really think we can win if they come back with thousands of ships? Bennett asked quietly. Morrison thought about the question carefully before answering. I think we can make them pay such a high price that they'll decide we're not worth the cost. The Kralthians are an empire. They think like an empire. They're used to easy conquests that make them richer and stronger. If we make conquering Earth too expensive, they might decide to leave us alone. That's a big gamble. Sir, everything about this situation is a gamble. Lisa, we gambled that we could build these ships in secret. We gambled that our technology would work in real combat. We gambled that we could surprise them. So far, the gambles have paid off. We just need to keep our luck going a little longer. They reached the hangar bay where a transport was waiting to take them back to the Valiant. As they boarded, Bennett looked back at the massive underground facility where so much of humanity's hope had been built in secret. Sir, do you think the people of Earth understand what we did for them? All those years of work in secret, all the sacrifices. Morrison smiled slightly. Probably not. But that's okay. We didn't do it for recognition. We did it because somebody had to be ready for the day when we met other species in the universe. Today proved we were right to prepare. Tomorrow we'll find out if we prepared enough. The transport lifted off and carried them back toward orbit. Back toward their ship. Back toward an uncertain future where humanity's survival depended on warships instead of surrender. The Kralthian homeworld of Kralth Prime had not seen an emergency council meeting in over 200 years. The last one had been called when a plague threatened to wipe out half the Empire's population. This meeting was being called because of something far more troubling to the Imperial leadership: a military defeat. High Commander Zelkar stood before the assembled council members, his blue skin darker than usual with barely controlled rage. Behind him, holographic images showed the remains of the fleet that had been sent to Earth. Twisted metal, burning hulls and the cold bodies of Kralthian warriors floating in space. "This is unacceptable," Zelkar said, his voice sharp and angry. "A primitive species that should barely have mastered fusion power has destroyed one of our fleets. They humiliated us. The news is already spreading across the Empire. Other conquered species are hearing about this and starting to question our strength." Councillor Nixra, one of the oldest members of the council, watched the images with a calm expression that annoyed Zelkar even more. She had always been the voice of caution, always urging careful thought instead of immediate action. Zelkar considered her weak and outdated. "Commander, please explain to the council exactly what happened," Nixra said. "How did these humans destroy so many ships so quickly?" Zelkar pulled up the sensor logs from the surviving ships. The humans launched 80 vessels from their planet's surface. Large ships, military design. Then they vanished completely from our sensors. No heat signatures, no energy emissions, nothing. Our ships couldn't detect them at all. "Stealth technology," another counselor said. "But we have countermeasures for stealth systems." "Not for this kind," Zelkar admitted. The humans appeared at point-blank range, fired weapons that went straight through our shields and disappeared again before we could respond. Their weapons use some kind of plasma technology we've never encountered. Our shields are designed to stop energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, but these plasma beams pass through as if the shields weren't there. The council chamber filled with worried voices. For 3,000 years, the Kralthian Empire had been the dominant military power in this region of space. Their shields were legendary. Their weapons were feared. Their fleets were unstoppable. The idea that some unknown species had technology superior to theirs was deeply troubling. "We must respond with overwhelming force," Zelkar said loudly, silencing the other voices. "I propose we send the Grand Armada to Earth, 5,000 ships. We will reduce their planet to ashes and make an example of them that will be remembered for 1,000 years. 5,000 ships? Nixra said calmly. That is 1/3 of our entire military strength. You want to commit that much force against a species we clearly don't understand. What is there to understand? They have 80 ships. We have thousands. Numbers will overwhelm their technological advantages. Nixra stood up slowly. Despite her age, she commanded respect in the council chamber. When she spoke, everyone listened. Commander, these humans kept their true capabilities completely hidden until the moment they needed them. They built an entire fleet in secret and waited for exactly the right moment to reveal it. Does that sound like a primitive species to you? It sounds like they got lucky with some salvaged technology, Zelkar shot back. Perhaps, or perhaps they are far more capable than we assumed. Consider what we know. They developed advanced stealth systems, new weapons technology, and ships that can match ours in combat. They did all of this while appearing to be a primitive species barely capable of space travel. That level of deception requires sophisticated intelligence and long-term planning. Another counselor spoke up. What are you suggesting, Nixra? That we don't respond to this insult? I'm suggesting we learn more before we commit massive resources to what might become a costly war. Send scouts. Gather intelligence. Understand what we're truly facing. Then make an informed decision. Zelkar slammed his fist on the podium. This is exactly the kind of weak thinking that will destroy our empire. We are the Kralthians. We have ruled this region for millennia. We do not back down from primitives because they got lucky once. The vote was close, but Zelkar won. The Grand Armada would be assembled and sent to Earth. 5,000 warships carrying warriors who now understood they faced a genuine threat. There would be no ultimatums this time. No chances for surrender. The Empire would demonstrate its power in a way that could not be misunderstood. Meanwhile, on Earth, Captain Morrison was conducting training exercises with his crew when the long-range warning sensors picked up something disturbing. Commander Bennett brought the report to him immediately, her face pale. Sir, we're detecting a massive fleet entering the outer edge of the solar system. Initial count is over 4,000 vessels, still climbing. Morrison felt his stomach drop. He had expected the aliens to return, but not this quickly and not in these numbers. Sound general quarters. Get me Admiral Peterson immediately. Within minutes, every human ship was on alert. Admiral Peterson's face appeared on view screens across the fleet, his expression grim. All captains, you've seen the sensor reports. The Kralthians have sent everything they have, 5,000 ships, maybe more. They're moving in a defensive formation, which means they're expecting our stealth tactics. This is going to be much harder than the first battle. Morrison studied the tactical display. The alien fleet was advancing slowly and carefully, maintaining overlapping sensor coverage and defensive positions. They had learned from their first defeat and adapted their tactics. The element of surprise was gone. "What are our orders, sir?" asked the captain of the EAS Thunder over the communication channel. Peterson was quiet for a moment. Morrison could see the admiral considering their options. They were outnumbered more than 60 to 1. Even with superior technology, those odds were nearly impossible. "We split into hunter groups," Peterson finally said. "Groups of 4 ships each. We'll hit them from multiple directions simultaneously. Force them to divide their attention. Use our speed and stealth to stay mobile. Don't engage in direct combat if you can avoid it. Hit and run. Constant harassment make them pay for every kilometer they advance toward Earth." "Sir, that's a delaying tactic," Morrison said. "We can hurt them, but we can't stop them." "I know, Captain. But every hour we delay is another hour for Earth to evacuate civilian populations to shelters. Another hour for our industrial facilities to produce more weapons and ammunition. Another hour to come up with a better plan. We buy time with blood if we have to." The channel went quiet. Every captain understood what Peterson was saying. This wouldn't be a quick, clean victory like the first battle. This would be a grinding fight where human ships and human lives would be spent to slow down an overwhelming enemy force. "All ships, move to your assigned positions," Peterson ordered. "Remember what we're fighting for. Every person on Earth is depending on us. We don't have to win. We just have to refuse to lose." Peterson out. The human fleet dispersed, 80 small ships moving to face an armada that darkened the stars. Morrison looked around his bridge at the young faces of his crew. They were afraid, but they were ready. They knew the odds and they knew the stakes. "Helm, take us to our patrol coordinates," Morrison ordered. "Weapons, I want every system checked and double-checked. Engineering, maximize power to shields and engines. Communications, maintain constant contact with our group partners." "Yes, sir," came the responses from around the bridge. Commander Bennett moved close to Morrison and spoke quietly. "Do you think we can actually stop them, sir?" Morrison watched the tactical display, showing the massive alien fleet advancing, steadily toward Earth. He thought about his answer carefully. "I think we're going to find out what happens when humans refuse to surrender, even when surrender makes sense. We're going to show these aliens that some species would rather die fighting than live on their knees. And maybe, just maybe, that will be enough." The Ease Valiant moved into position, and behind it, 79 other human warships prepared for a battle that would determine whether humanity remained free or became just another conquered species in the Kralthian Empire. The battle began in the cold darkness between Mars and Jupiter. The EAS Valiant and 3 other human ships materialized from stealth at the edge of the Kralthian formation and fired a devastating volley. 4 alien cruisers exploded before they could even charge their weapons. The human ships vanished again before the return fire came. "Good hit," Morrison said from the captain's chair. "Helm, bring us around for another pass. Different angle this time. Don't let them predict our movements." All across the solar system, similar attacks were happening. Small groups of human ships would appear, strike hard, and disappear. The Kralthians tried to respond, but their massive fleet was too slow to catch the faster, stealthier human vessels. It was like trying to swat mosquitoes with a hammer. But there were 5,000 mosquitoes and only 80 hammers, and slowly the numbers began to tell. The EAS Thunder took a direct hit during an attack run and lost half its crew. The EAS Guardian stealth system failed during combat, and it was destroyed by concentrated fire from a dozen alien ships. One by one, human vessels were being whittled down. On the bridge of the EAS Valiant, Commander Bennett coordinated damage control as alarms blared throughout the ship. "Hull breach on Deck 7. Fire in the engine room. Casualty reports coming in from multiple sections." Morrison gripped the arms of his chair as the ship shuddered from another hit. They had been fighting for 12 hours straight, and both the ship and crew were beginning to show the strain. "How many ships have we lost?" 8 confirmed destroyed, another 5 too damaged to continue fighting. "The Admiral is pulling them back to Earth." That meant they were down to 67 combat-ready vessels against an enemy that still numbered in the thousands. Morrison checked the tactical display and saw that the Kralthian fleet had advanced more than halfway to Earth. At their current speed, they would reach orbit in less than 2 days. An incoming transmission interrupted his thoughts. Admiral Peterson appeared on screen, and Morrison was shocked by how tired the Admiral looked. There was blood on his uniform and smoke visible in the background of his bridge. All ships pull back to defensive line Delta. We're going to make a stand at the moon. Concentrate all remaining forces there. We can't stop them in deep space, so we'll defend Earth directly." Morrison acknowledged the order and the Valiant turned toward home. As they flew past Mars, he could see other human ships heading in the same direction, some trailing atmosphere from hull breaches, others showing scorch marks from near misses. They looked like a beaten fleet retreating in defeat, but they weren't defeated yet. On Earth, President Hayes stood in the Situation Room, watching the tactical displays with military commanders and civilian leaders. The news was being broadcast worldwide. Everyone on the planet could see the alien fleet approaching and the small number of human ships trying to stop them. "Mr. President, we should consider evacuation options," someone suggested. "If the fleet fails, we need plans to get key personnel to safety." Hayes turned and stared at the man who had spoken. "Evacuate to where?" "This is our planet. This is our home. There's nowhere to run, sir. We could send shuttles to remote areas, hide in underground facilities, disperse the population so they can't destroy everyone at once, and live like rats in holes while aliens occupy our world. No, we stand and fight. If Admiral Peterson's fleet can't stop them, then we fight them on the ground. Every soldier, every civilian who can hold a weapon. We make them pay for every city, every town, every house. We show them that conquering Earth is more trouble than it's worth." General Dixon nodded in agreement. "We've been preparing ground defenses, Mr. President. Anti-aircraft weapons modified for space targets, missile batteries, fortified positions around major cities. If they land troops, we'll give them a war they won't forget." Hayes looked back at the tactical display. The human fleet was forming up near the moon, 67 small ships against thousands. It looked hopeless, but he had learned something important over the past few days. Humans were at their best when things looked hopeless. In orbit around the moon, Captain Morrison positioned the Valiant in formation with the rest of the fleet. To his left was the ES Defiance, to his right the ES Freedom. Behind them, the rest of humanity's remaining warships formed a thin defensive line. Admiral Peterson's voice came over the fleet-wide channel. "This is it. This is where we hold the line. Behind us is Earth. 7 billion people depending on us to protect them. In front of us is an enemy that thinks numbers alone can win. They're about to learn different." Morrison could see the Kralthian fleet on his sensors now, a massive wall of ships advancing steadily. They weren't rushing anymore. They knew they had already won. They were just closing in for the final kill. "All ships wait for my command," Peterson said. "Let them come to us. Let them think we're desperate and cornered. Then we hit them with everything we have." The minutes dragged by slowly. Morrison watched the alien fleet draw closer and closer. His crew was silent, every person at their station, every hand ready at their controls. He thought about his family back on Earth, about the home he was fighting to protect, about all the people who would die if this defense failed. "They're in range." "Sir?" Lieutenant Cooper reported from the weapons station. "Hold fire," Morrison said. "Wait for the Admiral's command." The Kralthian fleet continued to advance. Morrison could see individual ships now on the visual displays. They were massive and powerful, designed to intimidate as much as to fight. Each one could probably destroy the Valiant in a direct confrontation. There were thousands of them. "All ships fire at will," Admiral Peterson finally commanded. Space erupted in violence. 67 human ships opened fire simultaneously, their plasma weapons cutting through the void like knives through water. The Kralthian shields held better this time, the aliens having modified them based on data from the first battle, but the concentrated firepower from so many ships at once was overwhelming. The front rank of alien vessels exploded or went dark, disabled by the massive volley. But behind them were hundreds more, and they returned fire with weapons that lit up the darkness like a deadly light show. The EAS Valiant rocked as energy weapons struck its shields. Morrison held onto his chair as the ship bucked and shuddered. "Return fire, all weapons." Around them, human ships were fighting desperately. The EAS Freedom took a direct hit to its engine section and began to spin out of control. The EAS Defiance charged directly into the alien formation, firing constantly until it was overwhelmed and destroyed. "Hull breach on multiple decks," Bennett reported, her voice strained. "Shields at 40% and falling. We can't take much more of this." Morrison watched as another human ship, the EAS Liberty, broke apart under concentrated fire. They had started this battle with 67 ships. Now he counted fewer than 50 still fighting. The Kralthian fleet had barely been dented. The numbers were impossible. An explosion rocked the bridge. Morrison was thrown from his chair. When he pulled himself back up, he saw that half the control stations were damaged or destroyed. Lieutenant Cooper was slumped over his console, not moving. "Damage report," Morrison shouted over the alarms. "Main weapons offline," someone yelled back. "Shields failing. Multiple hull breaches. We're losing life support on the lower decks." Morrison looked at the tactical display. The human defensive line was breaking. Ships were falling back or being destroyed. The Kralthians were pushing through, heading toward Earth. In a few more hours, alien ships would be in orbit over his home world. Then Commander Bennett pointed at her sensor display with a shocked expression. "Sir, I'm picking up new contacts. Multiple jump signatures. Something's entering the system." Morrison pulled himself to her station and looked at the sensors. His eyes widened. Ships were arriving through faster-than-light jumps. Dozens of them. But they weren't human ships, and they weren't Kralthian ships either. Admiral Peterson's voice came over the communications channel, and for the first time in days, Morrison heard hope in it. "All ships, we have reinforcements. Repeat, we have reinforcements." The new arrivals were attacking the Kralthian fleet from behind. Morrison didn't know who they were or why they were helping, but right now he didn't care. The enemy was caught between two forces, and their perfect advance had turned into chaos. "Get our weapons back online," Morrison ordered. "We're not done fighting yet." The mysterious ships that had arrived were unlike anything Morrison had seen before. They were organic-looking, curved and flowing rather than angular and mechanical. Their weapons fired beams of pure energy that seemed to bend space itself, and they were tearing through the Kralthian fleet with brutal efficiency. Commander Bennett managed to get the communication system working again. Through the static, they heard a voice speaking in heavily accented but understandable English. "Human vessels, this is Commander Tresh of the Veyron Alliance. We received your distress beacon and came as quickly as we could. Suggest you fall back and let us handle the front line while you repair." Morrison looked at Bennett in confusion. "We didn't send any distress beacon." "Admiral Peterson must have," Bennett said. "He mentioned sending out diplomatic missions to find allies. Looks like he found some." The battle continued, but the situation had completely changed. The Kralthians, who had been confidently advancing toward victory, were now caught between the remnants of the human fleet and these new alien reinforcements. Their formations broke apart as ships tried to defend against attacks from two directions at once. Morrison ordered the Valiant to fall back as suggested. As they retreated toward the moon, he could see the scale of what was happening. The Veyron Alliance had brought at least 200 ships, and they were fighting with the anger of people who had old grudges to settle. Later, Morrison would learn that the Veyrons had been conquered by the Kralthians 400 years ago, and had never forgotten it. On the bridge of his flagship, High Commander Zelkar watched his perfect plan fall apart. The humans had been on the verge of defeat. Another hour and Earth would have been his. Now these Veyron traitors had arrived and ruined everything. "All ships, concentrate fire on the Veyron vessels," he ordered. "Destroy them first, then we'll finish the humans." But the order came too late. The Kralthian fleet was already scattered and disorganized. The Veyron ships were faster and more maneuverable than expected. And the surviving human vessels, despite their heavy damage, were rallying and returning to the fight with renewed determination. Zelkar watched his ship count dropping steadily. 4,000 ships, 3,000, 2,000. The losses were staggering. This was supposed to be a simple punishment mission, a demonstration of imperial power. Instead, it had turned into the Empire's worst military disaster in recorded history. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Kralth Prime," his communications officer said nervously. "It's Counselor Nixra." Zelkar didn't want to take that call, but he had no choice. Nixra's ancient face appeared on his view screen, and her expression was cold with fury. "Commander, you have lost more than half the Grand Armada. You are ordered to retreat immediately and return to Kralth Prime to face judgment." "But we can still win," Zelkar protested. "Give me more ships and I'll destroy both the humans and the Veyrons." "You will do no such thing. You have already cost the Empire thousands of ships and tens of thousands of warriors. More importantly, you have shown our enemies that we can be defeated. Every conquered species in the Empire is watching this battle and taking note. You will retreat now, or I will personally see you executed for treason." The channel went dead. Zelkar stood on his bridge, surrounded by alarms and damage reports, and felt his career and reputation crumbling around him. He gave the order to retreat. The surviving Kralthian ships, now numbering fewer than 1,500, broke off from combat and fled toward the edge of the system. The human and Veyron forces let them go, too exhausted and damaged to pursue. The battle was over. Captain Morrison sat in his damaged captain's chair and felt the adrenaline finally leaving his body. He was exhausted beyond anything he had ever experienced. Around him, his bridge crew was slumped at their stations, some injured, all of them looking like they had aged 10 years in the past 3 days. "Casualty report," he said quietly. Commander Bennett checked her console with shaking hands. 37 crew members killed, 62 injured. We lost nearly a third of the ship's complement. Morrison closed his eyes. 37 people under his command who would never go home. 37 families who would receive devastating news. The price of victory was higher than he had imagined. What about the fleet? 23 ships destroyed. Another 15 too damaged to repair. Admiral Peterson is ordering the survivors to return to Earth for repairs and recovery. That meant humanity had lost more than half its fleet. They had started with 80 ships, won one easy battle, and then nearly been destroyed in the second. The cost had been terrible, but they had survived. Earth was safe. That was what mattered. 3 days later, Morrison stood in the White House with the other surviving ship captains. They were there for a ceremony honoring the fallen and celebrating the victory. President Hayes gave a speech about sacrifice and courage and the price of freedom. Morrison barely heard it. He was still too tired and too numb. After the ceremony, Admiral Peterson pulled Morrison aside. The Admiral looked even worse than Morrison felt, with bandages visible under his uniform and dark circles under his eyes. "The Veyrons want to meet with our leadership," Peterson said. "They're proposing an alliance. It turns out there are a dozen other species in this region that resent the Kralthian Empire. The Veyrons have been quietly organizing resistance for decades, waiting for the right moment. Our victory gave them that moment. So we're going to keep fighting?" Morrison asked. "No. The Kralthians have sent a diplomatic mission. They want to negotiate a treaty. Our intelligence suggests they're facing internal problems now. Other conquered species are rebelling, inspired by what happened here. The Empire is dealing with uprisings on a dozen worlds. They don't want to commit more resources to fighting us when they have bigger problems at home." Morrison felt a wave of relief wash over him. No more battles, at least not immediately. Time to rebuild, to heal, to mourn their losses. What terms are they offering? Recognition of Earth's sovereignty, a neutral zone around our system, and establishment of diplomatic relations. In exchange, we agree not to attack their territory and to open trade channels. It's not a surrender from either side, just an acknowledgement that continued war would be too costly for both of us. "Do you think they'll honor the treaty?" Peterson shrugged. "For now, yes. They've learned we're not an easy target, and that attacking us brings other enemies out of the shadows. In the long term, who knows? That's why we'll keep building ships and staying ready. But for now, we can breathe." 6 months later, Captain Morrison stood on the observation deck of the EAS Valiant, now fully repaired and upgraded with new weapon systems developed from captured Kralthian technology. Through the viewport, he could see Earth turning peacefully below, blue and green and beautiful. Commander Bennett joined him as she often did during quiet moments. She had been promoted to captain and given command of a new ship, the ES Hope, named in honor of what they had fought to protect. "Still thinking about the battle?" she asked. "Always," Morrison admitted. 37 people. I remember every name. They died protecting their world. That matters. I know. It just doesn't make it easier." They stood in silence for a moment, two veterans who had seen their world threatened and had refused to let it fall. Around Earth, construction platforms were building new ships. The Sentinel fleet was expanding rapidly now that the secret was out. Humanity was preparing for whatever the future might bring. "Do you think we'll have to fight again?" Bennett asked. Morrison thought about the Kralthian Empire, still controlling thousands of worlds, still powerful despite their losses. He thought about the Veyron Alliance and the other species who were starting to stand up against their conquerors. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was now part of that change. "Probably," he said honestly. "But if we do, we'll be ready. We proved something important when they threatened us. We proved that humanity doesn't surrender. We don't back down. When someone threatens our home, We don't send diplomats begging for mercy. We send warships, Bennett smiled. That's going to make us either the most respected species in the galaxy or the most feared. Maybe both, Morrison said. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Let the whole galaxy know that Earth is defended. Let them know that humans will fight for their freedom, no matter the odds. Let them know that we would rather die standing than live kneeling. That's very dramatic, sir. Morrison laughed, the first genuine laugh he had managed in months. I've been practicing. I'm going to be teaching at the new Naval Academy next year. Need to sound inspiring for the cadets? You'll be good at it. You can tell them about the time we beat an empire with 80 ships and pure stubbornness. 80 ships, pure stubbornness, and a lot of luck, Morrison corrected. Don't forget the luck. They turned away from Earth and looked instead toward the stars, toward the vast unknown where humanity was just beginning to make its mark. There would be more challenges ahead, more threats, more battles. But humanity had proven it could survive. They had sent warships instead of surrender, and that choice had changed everything. The future was uncertain, but it was their future. They had earned it with blood and courage and the absolute refusal to give up, even when giving up seemed like the only logical choice. And whatever came next,